The grand hall was buzzing with quiet conversations and soft laughter. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and sparkling silverware. The long tables were set with delicate china, crystal glasses, and carefully folded napkins, all arranged to impress the wealthiest of guests. Every detail was perfect, as if the room itself had been prepared to showcase the finest tastes and manners of high society. Waiters and waitresses moved between the tables, serving plates of carefully prepared food, refilling glasses, and ensuring every guest felt attended to. It was a night of luxury, elegance, and expectation. Among the many people walking gracefully across the hall, one figure moved differently. She was a young waitress, carrying trays of food, carefully balancing them as she stepped lightly across the marble floors. Her uniform was simple, a plain black dress with a crisp white apron. Nothing like the fancy gowns or tailored suits around her. Her hair was tied neatly behind her head, and her face, though tired from the long hours of work, held a quiet determination. She moved with a practiced ease, knowing exactly where to step and how to adjust the tray so that no glass spilled and no plate slid. But her eyes betrayed a different story. They flickered toward the corner of the room where a grand piano stood, untouched and waiting. Her gaze lingered there for just a moment, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Before she forced herself to focus back on the table in front of her, she had been working in fine dining for years now. A job she had taken not because she wanted to serve wealthy guests, but because life had left her little choice. She had dreams once, dreams of playing music, of sitting at a piano and letting her fingers dance across the keys, filling the room with melodies that could make people feel something real, something unforgettable. But bills had to be paid, rent had to be covered, and food had to be bought. Music became a dream put on hold, a quiet longing that stayed in the back of her mind. While she worked long hours serving people who often did not notice her at all, tonight, like every night, she moved from table to table, filling water glasses, taking empty plates, and responding to polite smiles or brief nods of acknowledgement. Some guests were kind, tipping generously, speaking to her politely as they asked for this or that. Others barely looked at her, treating her as if she were part of the furniture, an invisible presence there to make sure their needs were met without interruption. It was not a life of glory, not a life of recognition, but it was honest work. She had learned to move through it with grace. Still, the piano called to her quietly, a reminder of what could be, of what she had once loved, and what she might still become if she could just reach for it, as she carried a tray laden with glasses of sparkling water to a table of sharply dressed guests. One of the men glanced up at her and made a small joke. "You look like you belong at that piano," he said with a laugh, pointing to the corner of the room. The young woman smiled politely, nodding, but inside her heart skipped a beat. No one knew the truth that she had practiced hours each day. Her fingers had memorized scales and melodies that music flowed through her even when she was serving plates of food. She wished she could respond, not with words, but with music, letting the piano tell them who she really was. But for now, she simply nodded, set down the glasses, and moved on. The room continued its rhythm of polite conversation, laughter, and the clinking of silverware. Each guest seemed absorbed in their own world, discussing business, art, travel, or gossip with an air of authority and wealth. The young woman moved quietly behind them, anticipating their needs, cleaning up after them, doing her best to remain unseen. She could hear the soft strains of a string quartet playing in another room. Music that was beautiful but distant, not quite enough to touch her heart the way she longed. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the piano, imagining how it would feel to press the keys, to let the notes float through the air, and capture the attention of everyone present. She shook her head slightly, reminding herself to stay focused. This was not her world. Not yet. She was here to serve, not perform. Still, small moments continued to tease her imagination. One guest accidentally dropped a napkin near the piano, and she bent down to pick it up, her fingers brushing the polished wood as she straightened. For a fleeting second, the piano seemed to hum under her touch, as if acknowledging her presence. She felt a thrill run through her, a mix of excitement and fear. She knew that such thoughts were dangerous in this world of order and expectation. The wrong step, the wrong glance, and she could draw unwanted attention, the kind that could end her job before it had begun. But the call of the piano was persistent. She could not ignore it completely. She moved to another table, where a group of older guests were discussing art. Their voices were low but sharp, each one trying to prove knowledge or taste that the others lacked. She refilled their wine glasses carefully, setting the bottles down gently, and noticed how they barely looked at her. It was a familiar feeling, one that she had grown used to, though it never became easier. A quiet sadness sometimes filled her chest at these moments, a longing for acknowledgement that she rarely received. But she learned to hide it, to keep her smile polite, to continue moving gracefully through the room. No one could see the fire that burned quietly inside her, a fire for music, for expression, for recognition not given in money, but in attention and appreciation. After delivering dessert to a table in the far corner, she allowed herself a brief pause near the piano. No one was looking at her now, and the hall felt slightly quieter for a moment. She placed her hand on the smooth keys, feeling the cool surface beneath her fingertips. A shiver ran down her spine as she imagined the sounds she could make, the melodies that could rise and fill the hall. Her mind wandered to moments from her childhood, sitting at an old, upright piano in a small living room, losing herself in music for hours. She remembered the way the notes felt alive, how the room seemed to breathe with her as she played. She closed her eyes for a brief second, imagining herself performing, feeling the music wrap around the guests, capturing their attention, changing the room in ways no words could. The sound of a guest laughing brought her back to reality. She pulled her hand away, straightened her apron, and forced her focus back to her work. There was still so much to do, so many plates to carry, so many glasses to refill. The life she had chosen, or that had been chosen for her, demanded attention, discipline, and invisibility. Still, she carried the memory of the piano with her as she moved between tables, each step a reminder that part of her world still existed, hidden beneath the surface of the one everyone else could see. As the evening wore on, the energy in the hall shifted. Some guests had grown tired from long conversations, others were deep in laughter or animated discussion. The young woman continued her careful dance among them, moving unnoticed, yet fully aware of everything happening around her. She knew the patterns of the room, which guests might need water, which might spill something, which might offer a kind word. Every movement required precision, every smile required practice, and she delivered both with quiet grace. Yet through it all, her mind returned again and again to the piano, the imagined music, and the possibility that tonight something extraordinary could happen. It was a delicate balance, this life she led, between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between work and passion, between invisibility and recognition. She had learned to survive in a world that rarely saw her, a world that judged her by her uniform and her role rather than by her talent or dreams. And yet the piano called to her persistently, reminding her that even in the quietest corners of life, brilliance could exist, waiting for the right moment to shine. She moved forward through the hall, taking orders, clearing plates, refilling glasses, all the while carrying with her the secret knowledge of what she could do, what she had once done, and what she might yet do. And so the night continued, the chandeliers sparkling, the guests talking, the music playing softly in the distance, and the young waitress moved among them, unseen yet full of possibility. Each step she took was measured, each smile carefully placed, but beneath it all, a quiet anticipation grew. Somewhere in the near future, she knew, the ordinary could transform into the extraordinary. And though no one yet noticed her dreams, she carried them with her, like a secret melody waiting for the moment it would finally be heard. The night outside was cool, but inside the grand hall, warmth from the chandeliers and the soft chatter of guests filled the air. The young waitress moved from table to table, plates in hand, but her mind drifted away from the work at hand. She carried herself gracefully, smiled politely when greeted, and responded to requests as if nothing else existed. But inside, her thoughts were far from the tables, far from the wine glasses, far from the polite laughter of the guests. They were back in a different place, a place that had existed long before this uniform. long before the demanding schedules, long before life had asked her to put her music aside. She remembered her first piano. It was not grand or elegant, but old and chipped, sitting in the corner of a small living room that smelled of wood polish and morning sunlight. Her parents had not been wealthy, but they had recognized her love for music. The piano had been a gift on a quiet morning when she had turned 6, a moment so small and yet so significant that she remembered every detail. She had rushed to it with small, eager hands, pressing the keys one by one, ferreting the way the sounds could come together to make something beautiful. The piano spoke to her in ways no words ever could, and she spoke back through her fingers. Every note was a conversation, every chord a confession. Years passed, and she learned quickly. Lessons came from local teachers who recognized her talent. Lessons that pushed her, challenged her, and sometimes left her frustrated but always determined. She would spend hours alone in that living room, the sunlight fading into evening, her small fingers moving across the keys as if they were extensions of her own thoughts. Music became her world, a place where she could be herself without judgment, without interruption, without the constant demands of survival. Her fingers memorized scales, pieces, and melodies. Her mind memorized the stories that each song told. Every time she played, she felt alive in a way nothing else could make her feel. But life, as it often does, brought obstacles. Her family's struggles grew, and her own responsibilities increased. Schoolwork, chores, and part-time jobs demanded her attention. Dreams that once seemed inevitable became luxuries she could not afford. The piano remained in the corner of her childhood home, waiting silently as her music was pushed aside. She tried to stay connected, playing whenever she could, but the hours were stolen by necessity, not by choice. She learned early that talent alone was not enough to survive. Practical decisions had to come first, and so music became a quiet companion. A dream she carried in her heart but rarely allowed to breathe openly. Her first job as a waitress had started simply, almost by accident. She needed money, a steady paycheck, a way to contribute and survive. The restaurant where she began was not fancy. It did not sparkle with chandeliers or glittering silverware, but it taught her skills she would need for the grand hall she worked in now: how to anticipate guest needs, how to carry heavy trays, how to smile when tired, how to be seen yet invisible. It was demanding work, and some days were exhausting. But she carried herself with a quiet dignity, learning the ways of the world that valued appearances more than talent. And still, through every shift, she thought of the piano, the music she had loved, the moments she had felt truly herself. Tonight, as she served the tables in the luxurious hall, memories came to her in small flashes. A teacher who had told her she had potential, a friend who had laughed when she first played a complicated piece, a feeling of sunlight on her hands as she practiced in the living room. Each memory carried a rush of warmth, but also a pang of regret. She had let life's practicalities take over, had hidden her talent in a safe corner where no one could see it, had become a person who served instead of performed. And yet, despite all of that, the piano still called to her, whispering possibilities she thought were gone forever. During a brief moment when no guests needed her, she leaned against a wall near the piano. She could hear the low murmur of voices, the clinking of silverware, the soft footsteps of other staff moving through the hall. But her attention was entirely on the piano. She placed a hand lightly on the keys, imagining how it would feel to press them and fill the room with music. Her heart raced with the thought. Could she really do it? Could she stand here in front of people who had never even noticed her, and let the music speak for her? She had never performed in a setting like this before. She had only practiced in small rooms, alone, or for a few family members who appreciated her quietly. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. A small incident stirred the moment further. One of the guests, a man in a dark suit with sharp eyes, glanced toward the piano and said something under his breath. "It's a shame that beautiful instrument sits unused," he said to his companion. The young woman felt her heart skip. No one was speaking to her, yet somehow their words seemed to reach her directly. The piano had always been waiting for this, waiting for someone to notice it, to awaken it. And now, in the presence of this casual remark, she felt a spark of courage. Perhaps, just perhaps, This could be a night when she stopped hiding. When she allowed her music to speak louder than her silence, she returned to her duties, moving among the tables with careful steps. But the thought of playing continued to grow in her mind. Every action became a rehearsal, every movement a preparation for something greater. She imagined the guests turning toward her, their expressions changing as the first notes floated across the room. She imagined the silence that would fall, the emotions she could stir, the stories she could tell without saying a word. It was intoxicating, almost overwhelming, but it gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. As the evening wore on, she found herself observing the guests more closely than before. Their laughter, their gestures, their conversations, all of it became part of a larger scene in which she was both invisible and central. She noticed the way a man held his glass with careful precision, the way a woman tilted her head while listening to another, the subtle movements that indicated impatience or enjoyment. All of these observations fed into her mind, sharpening her awareness, preparing her for a moment she did not yet know would come. She was learning in this luxurious environment the patterns of human behavior, the timing of attention, the quiet shifts in focus that could turn an ordinary action into a remarkable event. And in the back of her mind, she kept returning to the piano, imagining how each note she played could interact with these patterns, how music could capture not just ears but hearts. In one particularly quiet moment, a child at one of the tables dropped a small toy near the piano. The young waitress bent to pick it up, her fingers brushing the polished surface of the keys. A shiver ran through her. It was a small, accidental touch, but it reminded her of all the times she had felt music in her fingertips, the countless hours she had spent learning how to coax emotions from the black and white keys. She held her hand there for just a moment longer, imagining the first note she might play tonight if she found the courage. The idea seemed almost impossible, but the excitement it brought her was undeniable. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a guest asking for water. She quickly turned, moving with practiced ease to meet the need, and in the process, a strange feeling settled over her, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and hope. She realized that tonight could be different. Something in the air and the rhythm of the hall, in the unnoticed tension behind the polite smiles of the guests, made her believe that the ordinary might transform into something extraordinary. She did not yet know how or when, but the possibility existed, and it was enough to make her heart beat faster, even as she moved through the hall. Delivering food and clearing plates, she could not shake the feeling that change was coming. She imagined herself sitting at the piano, her fingers poised over the keys, the guests turning toward her, drawn by the sound she would create. She imagined the room falling silent, the air charged with attention, and the music telling stories of longing, courage, and hidden talent. It was a vision so vivid that for a moment she forgot the trays in her hands, the uniform on her body, the invisible role she played in this world of wealth and elegance. For a brief moment, she was not a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, person finally allowed to be seen. The night continued, each passing minute heightening her anticipation. She moved with purpose, observed with intention, and imagined with abandon. Every glance at the piano, every brush of her fingers against the keys, every thought of what could happen built a quiet tension inside her. She understood that opportunity might not come twice, that courage had to be seized when it presented itself, and that sometimes the extraordinary demanded action, not patience. And so she prepared in small but meaningful ways for the moment when she would step beyond the boundaries of her ordinary life and into something far greater. By the time the main course had been cleared, the desserts were being brought out, a sense of expectancy had settled over the hall, though no one else could see it. The young waitress felt it in every fiber of her being. She was ready, even if she did not yet know what would trigger the moment. She could feel the music in her bones, waiting, ready to erupt. And she knew that tonight, perhaps she would no longer be invisible. Perhaps the piano would finally speak through her, and perhaps, at last, she would be heard. The hall had grown quieter as the evening moved toward its middle hours. Guests were finishing their main courses, some leaning back in their chairs to rest, others deep in conversation. The waitstaff moved briskly, attending to requests, refilling glasses, clearing plates. The young waitress continued her careful routine, yet her mind was increasingly elsewhere. The piano in the corner seemed to grow larger in her imagination with every passing minute, as if it knew that a turning point was approaching and it wanted her to notice it. It began with a small commotion. One of the staff hurried toward the head of the hall, whispering to another. Something had happened. The pianist, a professional who had been hired for the evening, had been delayed and was not answering calls. A murmur spread among the staff. The guests, meanwhile, continued their conversations, unaware of the brewing problem. In another corner, the head waiter frowned and looked around. This performance was supposed to be part of the evening's program, a subtle entertainment between courses. Without the music, the atmosphere would feel incomplete. The young waitress felt her heart pound in her chest. She had been practicing this job for years, learning the rhythms of service, the ways to move unnoticed, and the careful balance between being seen and remaining invisible. And now, she realized, the invisible world might finally collide with the visible. The thought made her dizzy with excitement and fear. She had never performed in front of an audience like this. Never in a place where so many wealthy, discerning eyes could judge her with a glance. What if she made a mistake? What if she embarrassed herself? What if this chance slipped through her fingers? Yet the pull of the piano was stronger than any doubt. She found herself standing near it, pretending to adjust a napkin on the small table beside it, while her eyes lingered on the polished keys. The head waiter glanced her way and frowned slightly, then went back to coordinating staff. She wondered if anyone had noticed her gaze, if anyone had realized that she had spent years learning to play music, or if she was just another waitress blending into the background. The thought of remaining unnoticed was almost comforting, but something inside her was shifting. She could feel that this was the moment when invisibility might turn into recognition, when silence might turn into applause. A soft cough came from a table nearby, and a guest glanced toward the corner where the piano sat. The young waitress felt her hands grow clammy. Her mind raced. Could she do it? Could she rise from her routine and step into the light? Her life had been made up of small decisions, careful movements, polite smiles. Every day had been a rehearsal for the mundane, for service, for invisibility. And yet, suddenly, an opportunity appeared, an opening that demanded courage rather than caution. She felt it calling to her, a voice quiet but insistent, asking her to trust herself, to trust the music that had lived inside her for so long. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she weighed the risk. She could retreat, pretend she had not noticed, and continue to serve as she always had. That would be safe. It would be comfortable. But something in her chest tightened at the thought of ignoring this chance, of letting the piano sit silent while the room went on without her. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the keys, cold and smooth, and a spark ran through her. She imagined the first note ringing out, pure and clear, and the way it might still the conversation around her. She imagined the way the eyes of the guests might turn toward her, not with disdain or impatience, but with surprise, awe, and appreciation. She stepped closer, pretending to adjust her uniform, her heart hammering. Around her, the hall moved in its usual rhythm. Some guests had noticed the absence of music and were exchanging puzzled looks. Others remained absorbed in conversation, unaware of the shift in the evening. The head waiter whispered something urgently to another staff member, his expression tight with worry. The young waitress felt her palms grow sweaty. Every instinct told her to step back, to remain invisible, to continue as she always had. But another voice inside her whispered, persistent and insistent, "Now, this is your moment. Do it now." She glanced toward the far end of the hall where a few children were finishing their desserts, their wide eyes curious and innocent. She imagined the music reaching them first, drawing their attention, perhaps even making them smile or lean forward in awe. She imagined their parents looking up and realizing that something extraordinary was happening in the corner of the room. That small, private image strengthened her resolve. She could almost feel the music flowing through her fingertips already, soft at first, delicate, but full of emotion and power. The head waiter was moving closer to the piano now, speaking in urgent whispers, perhaps instructing her to stay back. but she could not. Her body moved almost on its own, driven by something deeper than fear or caution. She walked toward the piano, careful not to draw too much attention, though she knew that some guests had already noticed her shifting position. The closer she got, the more her heart raced, her breath coming faster. The polished wood gleamed beneath her hands as she touched the keys gently, testing the feel. Recalling the thousands of hours she had spent practicing every scale, every chord, every melody, a small voice inside her reminded her of the consequences. She could be laughed at, scolded, or even dismissed from the hall. The risk was real. And yet, she could not retreat. Music had been her constant companion, her escape, her identity. It had waited patiently for this moment, hidden in her heart, but ready to be shared. She took another deep breath, imagining the first note. It would not be perfect, perhaps, but it would be hers. It would speak her truth, even if no one understood it fully at first. Guests began to notice her now. A man in a dark suit turned his head slightly, curious. A woman with a pearl necklace paused mid-bite, glancing toward the corner of the room. Whispers began to ripple through the tables, soft murmurs of speculation. "Is she going to play?" one guest asked quietly. Others followed their gaze, some amused, some curious, some skeptical. The young waitress felt the weight of their attention, a heavy, almost tangible presence that pressed against her chest. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She could feel the room holding its breath with her. And then she pressed the first note. It was soft, cautious, but immediately full of life. The sound seemed to fill the corner of the hall, subtle at first, almost hesitant, but unmistakably beautiful. Conversations paused, forks hovered in midair, and heads turned toward her. She took another deep breath, letting the next note follow naturally. Her fingers moving with a fluidity that surprised even her. The music grew steadily, more confident, more expressive, as if it had been waiting all these years for this very moment. Each chord carried emotion, each melody told a story. And the room began to change around her. Guests who had been skeptical now leaned forward, curiosity replacing amusement. The children were mesmerized, their wide eyes fixed on her fingers moving across the keys. Parents exchanged glances, some smiling in disbelief, others shaking their heads at the unexpected brilliance of the performance. The wealthy, sophisticated patrons who had barely noticed her moments before were now fully engaged. Drawn into the sound she created, every note seemed to command attention, every chord a statement of courage and talent. She played with a mixture of precision and emotion, letting her feelings guide her hands as much as her training. The room was silent except for the music, yet the silence was alive with energy. Guests felt it, though they could not name it, a tension that lifted and settled, a beauty that was impossible to ignore. Even the headwaiter, who had approached cautiously, stopped in his tracks, watching with astonishment as the young waitress transformed the hall with sound. She was no longer invisible, no longer just a part of the service staff. She had become the center of attention, not through words or status, but through pure, undeniable talent. With each passing minute, her confidence grew. The fear that had gripped her at the start melted away, replaced by the joy of expression. She remembered the countless hours she had spent alone at the piano, the times she had practiced until her fingers ached, the moments when music had been the only companion who truly understood her. All of it had led to this night, this performance. This connection with people who had never expected to hear such beauty from someone they had overlooked. The music swelled, filling the hall with a richness that seemed to touch every corner. Guests were leaning in, whispering to each other, their earlier conversations forgotten. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotion she conveyed. Others were clapping quietly, hesitant to break the spell. She was aware of every reaction, yet she did not falter. Her fingers flew across the keys with confidence and grace, telling a story more powerful than words could ever convey. By the time she reached the final notes, the entire room was silent, holding on to the last vibrations of sound as if afraid to let them fade. Then, as she lifted her hands and the final note lingered, a wave of applause erupted. It was thunderous, heartfelt, and immediate. Guests stood, some with tears streaming down their faces, others clapping with sheer admiration. The young waitress felt a rush of exhilaration and relief, her heart soaring. She had taken a risk, stepped beyond her routine, and in doing so had transformed the entire room. For a moment, she simply sat at the piano, letting the applause wash over her, allowing herself to feel the magnitude of what had just happened. She had been invisible for so long, overlooked and underestimated, yet here she was, commanding attention not through wealth, status, or pretense, but through the simple, honest beauty of her music. The room had recognized her in a way she had never expected, and she felt a deep, overwhelming sense of fulfillment. The applause echoed through the grand hall, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. The young waitress sat at the piano for a moment, letting the sound of clapping wash over her, and only then did she allow herself to exhale. Her chest was still pounding, her hands trembling slightly, but the feeling inside her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had taken a risk, stepped out of the shadows, and shared a part of herself that had been hidden for years. Now the room was filled with a new energy, a charged excitement that could be felt in every corner. Guests were leaning forward in their chairs, some still clapping, some whispering in disbelief. They had come expecting a formal dinner with polite conversation, a few subtle touches of entertainment, and perhaps the usual piano background that played quietly and went largely unnoticed. Instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. The performance had been raw, emotional, and stunning, a moment of honesty that had caught everyone by surprise. People looked at each other, eyes wide, as if trying to confirm that what they had just experienced was real. The young waitress rose from the piano slowly, almost hesitant to leave it. It had been her world for so long, a private space where she could express everything she felt. And now that it had been shared, she felt a mixture of pride and vulnerability. She could see the faces of the guests, some smiling warmly, others wiping away tears, and a few sitting in stunned silence. Their reactions told her that her music had reached them, touched them in ways that words never could. She had become more than a server in a uniform. She had become the center of their attention. It's a source of an unforgettable experience. A child at one of the tables, who had been quietly watching her with wide eyes, clapped with innocent enthusiasm. The sound was bright and pure, and it made her smile. Remembering the days when she had first learned to play the piano, full of wonder and curiosity, the child's reaction reminded her that music was universal, that it had the power to connect hearts across age, status, and expectation. She could see the parents now looking at her differently, their earlier casual indifference replaced by admiration. For the first time, she felt that her talent was recognized. Not just politely acknowledged, but truly seen and felt. The wealthy guests, some of whom had initially looked at her with polite dismissal, were now engaged in quiet conversation about her performance. They spoke in tones of awe, trying to describe the feelings the music had stirred. One man, usually so composed, had his hand pressed lightly to his chest, his eyes moist, as if the music had reached a place deep inside him that he rarely admitted existed. Another guest, a woman known for her sharp judgment and critical eye, was leaning forward with a smile that was almost shy. The usual air of superiority replaced with something softer, more human. Every person in the room had been affected in ways that could not be ignored. The young waitress returned to her work, collecting empty plates and refilling glasses. But the routine she had followed countless times before now felt different. The world around her had shifted, and she could feel it in subtle ways. Guests who had barely noticed her before were now speaking to her politely, even warmly. Some offered thanks, not just for the service, but for the music, for the courage it had taken to perform. She responded with quiet humility, smiling and nodding, but inside, she felt a growing sense of confidence. The invisible barrier that had separated her from the high society guests was beginning to dissolve, replaced by genuine acknowledgement of her talent and presence. The head waiter approached her cautiously, his face a mixture of surprise and admiration. "That was remarkable," he said quietly, almost as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. "I've never seen anything like it." She nodded, trying to appear modest, though her heart swelled with pride. For years, she had been invisible in this environment, moving quietly among the guests, unnoticed and unremarked upon. Now, in a single performance, she had transformed the perception of those around her. She realized that talent, when shared courageously, could create a shift that nothing else could achieve. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the hall continued to change. Guests who had been engaged in mundane conversation now lingered at their tables. Drawn by the memory of the music they had just heard, some whispered to each other, replaying the performance in their minds, marveling at the emotional depth and skill displayed. Others simply sat quietly, savoring the lingering echoes of the notes. The way the music had created a moment of shared humanity in a world often defined by status and appearances. The young waitress observed all of this with a quiet satisfaction, aware that she had created something rare and valuable, something that would be remembered long after the night ended. Her mind wandered back to the countless hours she had spent alone at the piano, practicing in a small room, dreaming of a day when her music might reach an audience. She remembered the times she had played for no one but herself, feeling both joy and frustration, longing for recognition, yet willing to wait patiently. Now, all of those private efforts had been rewarded in a single, extraordinary moment. She realized that the years of dedication, the sacrifices, and the patience had not been in vain. They had prepared her for this opportunity, had given her the skill and courage to step into the light when it mattered most. Some guests approached her directly, offering compliments and expressing genuine admiration. They spoke of the way the music had moved them, how it had transformed the hall, how it had made them feel something profound. She accepted their words with humility, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had never imagined that her playing could have such an effect, that her music could bridge the gap between herself and people who had seemed so distant, so unreachable. And yet here it was proof that talent and courage, when combined, could create moments of true connection. The staff, too, watched with amazement. Waiters and waitresses who had known her as a quiet, efficient colleague now saw her in a new light. They whispered among themselves, exchanging looks of admiration and surprise. Even the head waiter, who had initially been concerned about the disruption, now nodded with respect. He had witnessed her transformation, the way she had taken control of a moment and turned it into something unforgettable. The young waitress felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. For once, she was not just serving the guests. She was part of the story of the evening, a living, breathing participant in the creation of something extraordinary. The room had settled into a new rhythm. The soft hum of conversation had returned, but it was different now, enriched by the memory of what had occurred. Guests who had been skeptical or dismissive were now talking quietly, sharing their impressions, marveling at the unexpected brilliance of a performance they had not anticipated. The young waitress moved among the tables, completing her duties, yet feeling a sense of liberation. She had risked exposure, risked embarrassment, and yet the outcome had been more rewarding than she could have imagined. She had proven to herself and to others that talent and courage could command attention and respect. Even in a world that often overlooked those who did not conform to its expectations. As the evening drew on, the young waitress found a moment to return to the piano. She placed her hands gently on the keys, not to play this time, but simply to feel the instrument beneath her fingers. The memory of the performance lingered in the room, a quiet echo of courage and expression. She realized that this night had changed her, not just in the eyes of the guests, but in the way she saw herself. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a part of the service staff. She had taken control of a moment, shared her talent, and created an experience that would be remembered. And in doing so, she had discovered a confidence that could not be taken away. The guests began to leave, some lingering to offer final words of appreciation, others moving on with the memory of the evening etched in their minds. The staff began to tidy the hall, returning it to its ordinary state, but the energy that had been created lingered in the air. The young waitress walked through the room, carrying the final trays and clearing the last plates, but she did so with a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the routine. She had been part of something extraordinary, had stepped beyond her ordinary life, and had touched the hearts of people who had never expected to be moved by the time the last guest had departed. The hall was quiet once more. The chandeliers reflected the soft glow of the evening lights, and the polished floors gleamed in the dimness. The young waitress sat at the piano one final time, letting her fingers hover above keys. She thought of the faces of the guests, of the expressions of surprise, awe, and admiration, and felt a profound sense of